With that, let's get started. Welcome again, Lee Lambert. Thank you for being here. Please take 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about your background and experience.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to come out here and hear a little bit about myself and my candidacy. So I thought what I'd do is just share 3 stories that really exemplify who I am as a person. First is, so my grandparents on my father's side, they had a 29-acre farm raising tobacco. During the Great Depression, when a lot of the black families in the community were struggling really hard and had nowhere to go, my grandparents took them in. And that's important to me because at the end of the day, it's about community. What we do is about community. On my mother's side, my mother grew up in war-torn South Korea. And she shared a story with me in which when the North Korean soldiers were surrounding the school that she was going to, in middle school at that time, all the parents got together and interlocked arms to prevent the North Korean soldiers from coming in and taking over the school. That also stays with me because it talks about the value of community, the value of education, and why, at the end of the day, why we're all here. We're here about our community. And that sticks with me to this very day. Another story I want to share with you, I was at an ACE meeting, American Council on Education. I was the newly minted president, and I forget his name. But the president at the time of the Institute for the Future came and spoke with us. And he said, one of your roles as a CEO is to help shape the future. And so that stuck with me too, because my role isn't just to be ministerial or to just oversee the operations. It's also about shaping the future direction of our institutions. And then the other story I'll share with you is I went on a trade mission trip with the former governor of the state of Washington to South Korea. So I spent part of my life living in South Korea, and we left in 1977. We were living on the south side of Seoul, and at the time that we left, there was only 2 bridges across the Han River. That whole south side of Seoul is now the headquarters to Kia and Hyundai. If you remember, is his name Psy, the singer, Gangnam Style, you remember that song? That is now home to the highest priced real estate in all of Seoul. When I lived there, it was dirt. It was just a set of apartments with just, like I said, just 2 bridges. Now there's like 27 bridges. There wasn't really a subway system. There is now, extensive subway system that goes all the way out to Suwon. So it goes way out from the core part of the city. And when you hike the mountains, you got cell phone service. You get in the subway and you're deep down, you have cell phone service. So when I saw all of that, guess what started going through my head? If South Korea could go from the experience I had as a child to going back 30 years later and seeing this massive transformation, I thought to myself, we're in trouble in the United States. Because if they could transform themselves in just that period of time that I was gone to where they are today, we've got a lot of catching up to do in this country. So shaping the future, community, all of that is critical to us being able to make sure we continue to be the #1 nation on the planet. So I bring all of that with me in terms of my thinking about the future of our community colleges, and more especially the future of Foothill-De Anza Community College District and the 2 colleges in the Sunnyvale Center as well. So that's who I am in a nutshell. I'll hit more pieces as we move through the afternoon.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one question. Do you support the so-called student center funding formula, in particular, the non-indexed 20% supplemented portion of the, I'm assuming the bill, performance piece? If not, what specific steps would you take to oppose this funding formula?
It's a great question. And as I look at I know some folks have referred to it as the SCIF. But get behind what the funding formula is trying to incentivize, right? We all have a challenge, especially in our community college systems across the country, but here specifically in the state of California, to better serve our low income, disadvantaged, communities of color, and so on. So how are we going to do a better job by those folks? If we're committed to equity, committed to social justice, what incentives do we need to be able to do that? So I think we have to think about that, right? And you think about the goals that have been laid out by the Chancellor's office to cut down the number of credits, to increase transfers, to increase support for our regional parts of our state. That's what's underlying the funding formula. Now, is this the right funding formula? I think if a funding formula is going to penalize colleges, it needs to be rethought. I think this funding formula does exactly that. I think it does penalize community colleges because it's not contextualized to the reality of what's going on. We're living through the birth dearth now. And depending on how you want to look at it, some refer to it as the Sansdemic, without people, right? We have less folks having children. Our country is turned against immigration, and we have low labor force participation rates. The funding formula doesn't account for that reality. So the impact is going to be devastating to many of the community colleges in the state. We need to rethink that whole framing, if you will. And so I would advocate for thinking differently about a solution around the incentives. But we do need to do better by our low-income disadvantaged students. There's no question about that. We have to figure out how we streamline the whole credit piece. In my current position at Pima Community College, I've challenged my folks to move to 60 credits for an associate's degree. So we've moved from, in some cases, 80 credits, closer to that 60. I know that's a challenge here as well in the state of California and right here at Foothill-De Anza. So we've got to do better by that. We've also worked to rethink and redesign the whole developmental education experience. I know you have AB 705, AB 1705, where the legislature is getting involved in doing what we should know that we should be doing because it's the right thing to do, right? And so those are the kinds of things that this funding formula is trying to address. I just don't think that's the right solution to the problem. It's seeking to create more problems than solving what needs to happen for our state and for our community here.
Thank you. This question was submitted online. Foothill-De Anza as a district has a population of Asian American and Pacific Islander students of well near 40% and 50%. What specifically do you see as the issues facing these students and Asian American and Pacific Islander employees? There's a second part, but I'll wait until you've answered the first.
So, first of all, the way I think about it is we're here as a community. And our community isn't just made up of Asian Pacific Islanders, Filipino X or Latinx, or Caucasian, or Black African American, or Native American. We are one community. So I start from that perspective. Now, when I look at our different communities, who's being disproportionately impacted by the policies and procedures of the institution, by the allocation of resources of our institution, and then if there's a disparate impact, then the question is, what do we need to do to address that? So if that disparate impact is impacting the API community specifically, whether it's employees or students, we need to have an honest conversation about that. What's missing? But we also have to understand the API community is not a monolith. It's made up of a number of different cultures. Some cultures fare better than others. And so we have to be careful in terms of how we think about the community at large. And so what I would be doing is first to understand what are the experiences, what are those disparate impacts, and then look at how do we put solutions in place to address that. But I also want to know, is that happening with our Latinx community? Is that happening with our Black African American community? Is that happening with our Native communities? As well as are white communities. And I noticed at my college, for example, one of the big gaps is male to female. Our males are being left behind at a much faster rate than our females. We've got to address that reality as well. So I'm all about, let's figure out what's going on. Let's respect all of our communities. But in doing that, we have to recognize some of our communities are being disproportionately impacted, and we need to address that. And if that's happening to the API community, we absolutely need to address that.
Great. The second part of this was also there's a new statewide community college program being set up to serve the AAN HPI students, similar to Puente and Umoja. What specifically do you plan to do to mobilize our district and colleges to be prepared to become part of this program?
Well, again, I come back to understanding what the impacts are. And I'm just taking from that question that there are disparate impacts happening to the API Native Hawaiian communities here in our region. And so what are those specific programs and how successful are they? And can we take the learnings from those and apply it to the API Native Hawaiian communities is what I'll be looking for. And trying to be equitable, not equal, but equitable, because our solutions have to actually solve the challenges they're facing. And they may be different depending on our respective communities. And again, our API communities are not a monolith. And so we have to keep that in mind as we start to zero in. Because I really want to make sure we're solving the right problem, not solving a problem.
Thank you. A little shift in type. What 3 adjectives describe your management skills and strengths? Why did you select those 3 words? And which one is the most descriptive of you?
I'm a kind, caring, and considerate person. And why do I say that? And it comes back to some of the things I was saying at the very outset. I put community first. And I think if we're to bridge the dynamics that are especially happening in our communities today, the rifts, sometimes it's along these political lines, sometimes it's along racial and ethnic lines, and so forth, we got to get back to kindness. Can we start to see ourselves as individuals, as human beings first, and start to repair that? And I pick care because I give great care to how we approach that. And I think a lot of that has to do with listening. Let's make sure we're listening for what's going on, not just listening so I can respond, but listening to really understand what's going on and solve the challenges. Because we all have challenges. We're all at different places in that spectrum, but we all have. And then considerate is I'm going to weigh all of that out along with all the other variables that are going on to figure out how we best can move forward together. Nothing is 100%, but can we do better than what we're currently doing? I think it takes kindness, care, and consideration to do those things.
Thank you.
Oh, can I add one other thing? I want to illustrate my point with actual what I've actually done that lives those things. So when I was in the state of Washington and we're going through the Great Recession, and so the governor had negotiated with our classified professionals a pay reduction. No other group of employees were asked to take a pay cut except for our classified professionals. That wasn't okay with me. So I sat down with our classified professionals and said, what can we do short of me violating an agreement that the governor negotiated? And so we came up with a solution, and that solution was, can we allow for overtime around professional development, and that would be a way for our classified professionals to earn back what had been cut. I was the only college president willing to go out that far. All the other districts were not willing to do that. Some folks thought I went against the governor. I said, no, we have an absolute need for professional development. So I'm not doing anything that's unlawful or illegal, but I did that because it was the right thing. and looking at how do we do the right thing by our employees. So that's one example of this. The other example is more recent. So when the pandemic hit, and you were hearing all these news stories about layoffs happening across the country at colleges and universities. And for us in Tucson, the University of Arizona was laying off a lot of folks. They were disproportionately impacting which communities? Last hired, first hired, last in, right? Or, whatever, how they say that, sorry. And communities of color disproportionately. So I came out to the community and I said, we're not going to lay off any regular employee of the college. I knew we had the resources to be able to do that. Yes, it was going to hit us because we lost enrollment, but I thought it was better for our employees to not have to worry about their job so we could focus on keeping this college going and meeting the needs of our students. And so again, that's another example of me being willing to go in a direction that a lot of other folks weren't willing. Of course, the board had to support that, and they did. But I just wanted you all to know I really take seriously when I say I'm about kindness and caring and consideration. I know it doesn't always feel that way when tough decisions are being made, but I want you to know I'm always keeping all of that in the back of my mind when we make decisions.
Thank you. From online, what would you do to attract and retain quality faculty to ensure quality, given that our district is one of the lowest paid in this region for faculty salary? In the past, the district did not pass through the entire cost of living salary increases allocated by the state to the faculty. How can we ensure that our faculty is made a priority for the district?
I mean, that is going to be a huge challenge for us. And when I look at the enrollment trends for Foothill-De Anza, it's not looking promising. But I also will say that that's true of a lot of colleges, not only in the state here, but across the country. So I would say to the faculty and to the staff, how can we reimagine the institution to attract a new set of students to want to come here? And what can we do to make sure we retain every student till they, why? Because that drives our revenue. And then in addition to driving our revenue, how do we attract new partnerships who want to invest in Foothill-De Anza? And then through all of that, then we can start to think about how do we invest back into our employees in the form of compensation, benefits, and the like. Because without revenue, it's going to become harder. I have to be honest with you. I'm not going to just give you a story up here that you might want to hear when the reality is it's going to be a rough road. But I think together we can solve this challenge because I'm doing it in Tucson. So because I'm doing it in Tucson, I believe we can do it here too. I'll give you some examples. So I went out, this is over the span of the 10 years, okay? So you have to, I know I don't have time to go through all the steps of this, but I brought in someone to map the entire district of Pima County to tell us if we put our resources in certain areas, would that help us to strengthen and grow our enrollment? And out of that came the notion of centers of excellence. We use that concept differently in this state, I understand that, but this notion of we want to be the best. I want to make sure faculty have the best equipment and tools to work with in the classroom, that they have a great physical environment for learning, that our curriculum is modern and up to date, that we're going to be a leader in our respective areas. So out of that came these centers of excellence. And so one of the centers of excellence we launched early on was in IT cybersecurity. And so we brought in a number of different partners. So one of our partners was with the Cyber Warfare Range. So the Cyber Warfare Range is a nonprofit organization of cybersecurity professionals. So we had them come and build a cyber warfare range on our East Campus. And what's unique about this range is it's live fire. In other words, our students, we integrated this into their experience, get to sit side by side with a trained professional and go into the deep dark net in real time. Not simulation, but in real time. All of those resources were donated to the institution. We could not have created a live fire cyber warfare range without the partnership. Now it's attracting other IBM, Raytheon, Tech Data, and others to want to partner with us. Now we're able to go out and be competitive for grants. I'm also getting folks who want to donate money to us. You get the picture, right? Because we put the community first and what the needs of the community are, now we remade a whole program. So my IT program, students would come in and they would exit pretty quickly. Now my IT program, cybersecurity program, it has grown over 160% enrollment since 2018 when we launched the center. We now have partnerships with Google, with Amazon. You get the idea, right? That can be done here because we're right in the backyard of these companies. And do we have a live fire cyber warfare range at this institution? So going back to the question about attracting faculty, when you start to build best in class, people want to be part of what you're doing. And so we get folks who want to come teach for us on a part-time basis. We have faculty who, once they retire, they want to come teach for us full-time. But it's still a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. Still a challenge to attract full-time faculty, even where I am. You know, cost of living is lower, but it's still a challenge even in that environment. But by building something that's special, it's putting a different view on the district and its commitment to the community, and I think you're starting to see it pay off for us in terms of the enrollment and the resources that's going to start to bring back into the institution.
Well, in a related question, the Chancellor is one of our chief fundraisers. Tell us about your experience cultivating and interacting with donors, and what would your fundraising priorities be?
I would first focus on the programs that align with community needs. Once we build those programs addressing the needs of the community, then all of a sudden you have folks who want to come and invest and be partners with you, which makes the fundraising go easier. I'm all about proof of concept. So I'm not going to come ask you for money until I can back up what your investment is going to lead to. So as a result of some of this, I had a foundation come to us with a $2.5 million investment, with a commitment for another $2.5 million investment. I had another group come to me and said, I'll give you $5 million, and if you can raise another $10 million. So we're already in the process of making big progress in terms of that commitment. I had Bank of America as part of their jobs initiative. They invested another seven-figure gift. I've had local philanthropists come forward with hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment, because it starts with a compelling vision. It doesn't start with, let me go ask you for the investment. Bring a compelling vision that solves the needs of the community, and when they see that, then those investments start to come. And that's the approach I've taken around fundraising, because I want to make sure that you know you're getting and that develops the trust and the buy-in that's needed, I think, for a long-term sustainability of our district.
All right, bear with me, this is a little bit long. Racism and anti-black racism in particular is one of the most destructive forces in our society and is clearly a central barrier to student success. What hurts black people hurts all people in society, and people of color in particular. But while anti-racist rhetoric is easy, actual institutional change that institutionally empowers people of color is much rarer. In this context, please explain what concrete anti-racist work you have successfully led, particularly addressing anti-black racism and specifically in complex, multiracial contexts in which others, people of color, must be considered and included. Please speak to your concrete actions.
So let me start with a story. My father grew up in the Jim Crow South. And as a young black man, he could not even go use the restroom. And that type of treatment is very much ingrained in the way I think and approach anti-blackness, racism, because when you can't even go use the restroom, that's not okay. And then it just kind of spiders out from there, right? He joined the U.S. Army because he didn't want his future family to live through the indignities that him and his brothers and sisters and his family and the community experienced. That's why he joined the Army and obviously ended up in South Korea. But again, my commitment is personal at a certain level. But how do I take that personal drive and then integrate it into a more professional context? And I believe that if we're committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not going to just create an office over here and say, these are the folks who are responsible for creating the diversity and equity for the entire district. It's about how do we fully integrate it into every facet of our operation. And so how do I do that? First and foremost, I talk about it openly. So giving voice to this reality. And then we start to look at where those barriers that exist across the organization. And one example of that is why you had to have AB 705, right? That's why there had to be AB 705. There shouldn't have had to be AB 705 because at my college, I didn't have a legislature telling me we needed to do this. I told my folks, this is not, too many of our students, black, Native American, it doesn't matter their background, we're getting stuck in developmental education. So we did a redesign work where multiple measures was one of the solutions to that, co-requisites coming out of that. We do iBest on the CTE side. In other words, creating more on-ramps. Students want to be in the program of study they're signing up for. They don't want to be in DevEd. So we created a way for that to happen. And by the way, once we launched our new design work, we actually doubled the success rates for math and writing by doing what I just described. Because of that, our course rates in DevEd has dropped from 80% down to 50%. And we won a Bellwether Award for the work we were doing in this area. So that's one example of my commitment, is to find the barriers to the success of our students and start to remove those barriers. Then another facet of that is on the employment side. How do we make sure that our employees have opportunities to grow and thrive within our organization? And so I task all the administrators to make sure that we're hiring folks who reflect the student body that we're in service to and the community within, our legal parameters, et cetera. So I believe in the state of California, you can't have an affirmative action plan in the true sense of that, what that plan used to look like. I used to review and develop affirmative action plans way back in the day. But it doesn't mean you can't be tracking or setting goals. Hopefully you can do that in this state. You can't have a timetable, though. But you can look at availability by different categories of classifications and say, okay, we know we have a gap. How can we close that gap? And because of that, we're one of the larger employers of Latinx faculty in the state of Arizona. I employ more Latinx faculty than the Maricopa system does, as an example. I make sure that my deans, especially in the applied technology areas where you don't see as many women, in the area of aerospace or automotive, to start to think differently about how we can bring more female instructors into the classroom. So those are just some of the examples that I've been focused on, because it has to cascade down. It can't be, like I said, an office. Not saying you don't need an office, don't get me wrong, I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying, but it can't be their sole responsibility. It's the responsibility of each and every one of us in the district to do our part, to create an environment, because it's not just about hiring folks, but it's also making them feel like they belong and a part of the community, that when they have thoughts and opinions that they're valued just like anybody else's. As a result, I think, sum total of all of this, Forbes ranked Pima as the #5 best employer to work for in the state of Arizona last year. I think that really is a positive statement on the work that we've been doing. Does that mean everybody's happy? No, it doesn't mean everybody's happy, right? But I think it represents that enough of our employees feel like they're valued and appreciated that they felt enough to say to Forbes that this is a great work environment to be in. That's what I am about, is creating those kind of environments where each and every one of us can thrive.
Thank you. What are the special qualities of Foothill-De Anza that intrigued you to apply as chancellor here?
First and foremost, the commitment from the board all the way down to the front lines of the institution around your values. That commitment to excellence, that commitment to equity and inclusion and sustainability, the fact that equity drives the student success of the institution as framed by the board, that's what makes it very attractive to me. We have a values alignment piece. And then it's great to have all these values, but how is it evidenced, right? I think the fact that Foothill-De Anza is the #1 transfer institution in the state of California speaks volumes. The dental hygiene program right on this campus is considered one of the best, not only in the state, probably arguably in the whole country. And the fact that this district has been a leader in the applied baccalaureate space, especially launching the dental 4-year degree piece. My understanding is you're going to be launching, or you already have, the respiratory therapy piece. And then when I did a tour this morning with Marty and Carla to learn that automotive is also doing something similar. I mean, I think that speaks volumes about the district. And I want to be part of a team of folks who want to be best in class, that commitment to excellence. And then you think about it for a moment. All that change I described in South Korea, and by the way, if you go to mainland China, you'll see the same thing. You go to Singapore, if you go all over Asia, you'll see the same thing happening, right? Where did it all begin? It began right here in the Silicon Valley. All this transformation began right here. I want to be where folks are thinking about transformation. Folks are thinking about trying to improve the lives of so many more people. And Foothill-De Anza is best positioned to not just be a leader here in this community or in the state of California, but for the country. So let's assume that place. Let's assume that this district is going to be the national leader again, because it was a national leader. It still is, but let's take it to the next level.
Can you please describe the differences between the funding of community colleges in Arizona versus the funding of community colleges in California? And what do you see as the major issues of Foothill-De Anza Community College will face in the coming years?
So one big difference, I receive no state aid from the state of Arizona. Sit with that for a moment. I receive no state aid through our general fund formula from the state of Arizona. Maricopa and Pima Community College are the 2 districts in the country that have that unenviable distinction. Now, do I receive money from the state? Yes, but it's in different pockets. It's in very strategic areas now. But as a general funding, 0. Also, the state of California supports the learners, the students. State of Arizona, our students get nothing from the state legislature. They just started doing a college promise at the university level, but not at the community college level. So just those 2 points alone speak volumes about the commitment of the state to its people. California has a long tradition of supporting its residents. And trying to keep tuition low, providing state aid where it makes sense. I think the funding formula still encapsulates that, this new funding formula. and I think that those things speak volume. And I want to be in a place where the state is committed to supporting, bless you, the community colleges. And unfortunately, I'm in a state that, it speaks for itself.
You? What type of work have you done to support undocumented students, especially considering that funding is declining and there are many barriers when they apply to financial aid because of the fear of revealing personal and family information?
So, state of Arizona. I know some of you, all I had to say was state of Arizona, right? So, when I first arrived in the state of Arizona, the board was committed to providing in-state tuition for our DACA students. And I firmly believe and champion that piece. So that's one level. I think that was the right move for the board to do. And then when I go to Washington, D.C. with our governing board, and even when I make trips, advocating for the Dreamers has been a big part of our agenda. Unfortunately, that's been a difficult challenge, as you all know. And then our voters in the state of Arizona decided to pass a law to where we can now provide in-state tuition again. So I've been a proponent of all of that all this way. And then while we were in that period where we were told we could no longer offer in-state tuition, we tried to figure out what we could do in terms of raising funds and et cetera, but that was nowhere going to make the kind of difference that it really needed to. We're required to ask these questions in the state of Arizona, so I can't get around the reality of what the state requires. But the commitment has been there, and as I noted, my mother came here and with basically nothing, and at a time when this country didn't provide a lot of support. So I've been a big proponent of supporting things that support our students who come to us from other countries and other parts of and that's always going to be part of who I am as a person and professional.
Thank you. Excited. As Chancellor, as you said, you are charged with forging a vision for our district. Please tell us what parts of your vision for De Anza and Foothill you think will cause the most disruption for faculty and require adjustment from them. What specific support do you anticipate faculty will need to face those disruptions, and how will you provide that support?
It's like that's
Never said it was going to be easy, did I?
Yeah, these are great questions, by the way. So I asked my team 3 questions. So where's the puck going? So if you're familiar with hockey, and Wayne Gretzky made this famous quote, right? And that was, meet where the puck's going to be. So that's the first piece. Second piece is, what problem are we trying to solve? And what's the data and evidence? What story is that telling us? So when you start to take all of that and unpack it, understand where that puck's going. So three components to that. One is the demographics, and I already touched a little bit about the demographics already, but there's also the reality of us individuals and our own insights. So what are learners telling colleges today? What are they telling us? They don't want long-term any longer. They want shorter term. They want more skills-focused, and they want more online. So those are some of the things they're telling us. We must heed those messages from the learners, the members of our community who are telling us this. And then the other piece is technology. And I talk about the 4 superpowers. So Pat Gelsinger, former CEO of VMware and now CEO of Intel, he penned an article called The 4 Superpowers. And he did this a few years back coming out of Davos. And he said the 4 superpowers aren't countries. They are artificial intelligence, mobile, cloud, and the Internet of Things. That is the reality that we're all faced with. That's where the puck's going. right? And I didn't even put in the political stuff and the social pieces either, but I just want to use those three to illustrate a reality. And so I think institutions who do not adapt to those realities, I hate to think where we're going to end up. And so Ian Morrison, some of you know that name, he's former president of the Institute for the Future, wrote a book called The Second Curve. And the second curve is just a metaphor, but if you envision it as two S curves. One S curve going like this, that's the industrial era curve. And the other S curve starting to slope up, that's the digital era curve. So he wrote about that at the turn of the century. So fast forward today, what are we seeing? This new reality playing out. If you haven't read Great Upheaval, which is directly about our sector of higher education, I encourage you to do that. I think board members, if you were at the New York City ACCT conference, you heard one of Arthur Levine, who was one of the authors of that book, speak. And what he said, I'm not trying to scare you all, okay? I'm just going to share what he said. And it's in the book, too. The two institutions who are most vulnerable to the change, and I just mapped a little bit of that, are our regional universities and guess who? Community colleges. But the way forward is what? Partnerships. So I would say to the faculty, let's work together and think about how do we partner with the Googles, the Apples, the Intels, and all these great companies here in this community to think differently about education. And how do we integrate more of the technology into that experience that today's learner and future learners are going to need to have. Because what future learners are telling us, Wiley just came out with a new report called Closing the Skills Gap. I think that's what it's called. And when they asked learners about the shelf life of their skills, they're basically saying the soft skills, which we tend to think about our gen ed and liberal arts curriculum around, the majority said that those skills are only good for about a year. And then right behind that was the technical skills. And then you go down to 2 to 3 years. The technical skills will be outdated quicker than the soft skills. And then you go down to 3 to 5 years. Our community is worried. They're scared about the skills they are getting from today's modern world. But we can be part of helping to transform that. Because I'm a liberal arts person. I went to the Evergreen State College. And of course, I'm biased. I don't think you could have a better, finer liberal arts experience than the one I had at Evergreen. But the thing that was really special about Evergreen was understanding the interrelationships among and between the disciplines. But the other thing that we did when I was at Evergreen, a lot of service learning, a lot of interacting with the community, a lot of data analytics when we didn't call it that, a lot of project management when we didn't call it that. I was getting all of that out of my liberal arts education. Do our students here at Foothill-De Anza know that they're getting the data analytics? Do they know they're getting the project management? Do they know they're learning how to interact and work with community? Let's be more explicit about those things and let's badge it, right? But that may mean we need to reframe the curriculum so that that becomes more intentional. Because guess what are the top skills, by the way, people are telling us in that Wiley report? Data analytics, project management. You get the idea, right? So I think we're already doing it if we reframe what we're doing. So our challenge for faculty is through, I think you have a teaching and learning center of some sort here on both college campuses, right? So are we making sure that we're helping support the faculty to rethink how we deliver to make sure that we're embedding these competencies in the curriculum where they're more explicit, and then helping the students translate that and then badge it so it becomes clear to employers that that's the competencies they're walking away from a liberal arts education. I don't think there's a better education one can have than one in the liberal arts. But we have fallen short. And it's not me saying it, just look at the enrollments. Where have been the greatest enrollment losses in this country? It's been in the liberal arts. So I think we can stem that tide. And I'm willing to work with the faculty, invest in their professional development to help make that transition. Then we have to leverage virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality. If some of you have played with that stuff, I mean, some of that is so immersive. I went to Cedars-Sinai in LA. I put on the headset, and I conducted hip surgery. In 5 minutes, I was conducting hip surgery. Now, that doesn't mean I want to be a doc, okay? But you get the idea, right? When we create these immersive experiences for our learners, then it's more engaging, and then we help them understand, what are you taking away from this? What better place to do this than here at Foothill-De Anza, the leading community college in the state of California for transfer education. Let's kick it up a notch. And I think investing in our faculty and the development is going to be key. But it's not enough to do that with the faculty. We've got to do that with our professional, our classified staff, and we've got to do that with our administrators as well. And dare I say it, even with our board members, so that they can see the potential of what can be done. And then we all start to move in that direction as part of an intentional plan. This doesn't require more money necessarily. It's about how you use what you have already and reposition the way you think about it, and invest in our people.
Please talk about any experience you have with delivering direct instruction or direct services to students. How well do you think you understand the on-the-ground work of faculty, counselors, and staff who deal with the daily realities that work entails and what the students face?
So when I was at Evergreen and at Centralia College, I was an adjunct faculty member for 8 consecutive years. So I was in the classroom with our students. And I worked primarily with the evening. I was in the evening program, so I worked with a lot of adult learners. And so I got to see firsthand the challenges they faced. Juggling home life during the day or work to make ends meet and then coming to school in the evening. This is before where things are now with online and all these other tools, okay? But the dynamics were very similar. And so I had that direct experience. When I was at Evergreen, as part of being a student, I worked in student activities. So I worked directly with students in that context. And then I was a resident manager. I worked in housing, and so I was an RA. We call ourselves student managers there, but it was basically being an RA. And then when I graduated, I did some work in our students' center, working with students directly. And tutoring and things like that. But I also was someone who used those services when I was a student as well. And I want us to all know that we're part of the same family. We all play different roles, and each one of us are important to the overall success of our students. And sometimes we pit one group against another. In reality, we all are needed for that student to be successful, because it won't happen otherwise. And I'll just use another example of this. When I was a student, I sat down with my faculty member, Rudy Martin, and Rudy said to me, Lee, I have some good news and I have some bad news. So what would you want to hear first? And I said, Rudy, tell me the bad news. He says, you can't write. You can't write. And he's talking about college level writing, because I learned coming through how to do the book report writing, right? That's not the kind of writing you need to really be doing, right? So he said, you can't write. But here's the good news, he said. We have a learning center where I want you to go. I'm going to introduce you to those folks there, and they're going to work with you. As long as you put forth the effort, we're going to put forth the effort to help support you. So the fact that I had that direct experience with my faculty member being honest with me about where I was in terms of my development at that time, and then having the services available to support what I needed outside the classroom, I wouldn't be standing here today. So I know it from a student perspective, but I also know it from a professional perspective. Yeah, I didn't do it full-time, for 2, 3, 4 years, but I did it. And I didn't do full-time teaching, but I did teaching. And all of that has informed my thinking about today and into the future.
Thank you. What do you see as the benefits and challenges of working in a multi-campus community college district?
So, just so you know about Pima Community College, right? So, at the time I took over Pima Community College, we were 6 campuses with a number of centers spread out throughout Pima County. And we were multi-campus, not multi-college. So I know Foothill-De Anza is a multi-college, but I think there's a lot of similarities when you strip back from the accreditation piece. And Pima was operating as if it was 6 separate colleges who weren't in communication with each other. Each college campus were doing their own things. So, but if you flip it for a moment and look at it from the student's lens, look at it from a community lens, and how are they experiencing our colleges, our campuses? And all of a sudden that tells you a completely different perspective. So when I sit down with employers, they would say to me, we don't know who to talk to at Pima Community College. Because when we go to the West Campus, we hear one thing. When they go to the East Campus, they hear another thing. You get the idea, right? May sound familiar in some ways. And then when the students would come, they want to be able to go from West Campus to East Campus to Desert Vista Campus to Northwest Campus in one seamless experience, right? In their mind, you're Pima. So if we think about our organizations from that perspective, all of a sudden it changes the way you think about the 2 colleges here and how we make decisions, how we create and remove barriers, going back to the barrier question earlier. There should only be one application for the student. They only have to apply one time. And then they should be able to move back and forth, not having to worry if their credits will transfer or not, because it's all the same. It's not different stuff, right? But because we put up the barriers, and then you add in race and ethnicity, all of a sudden you get the inequities. You get the idea, right? And then we're going to say we're about equity, we're about inclusion. How are we doing that if it's having a disparate impact on our learners? Especially when you break it down by race and ethnicity. So let's reimagine stuff. Here's what I think is unique, and this is what we've done at Pima. West Campus, you're the center of excellence for healthcare, allied and healthcare. That's your center of excellence. And we renovated and modernized the science labs there. And you're going to be the center of excellence for our arts and humanities. That doesn't mean you can't have some pieces at the other locations, but the folks who are leading and setting things emanate from our West Campus. Our applied technology, which is transportation, advanced manufacturing, building construction technology, all emanates from our downtown campus. But every campus has the gen eds. You start to see how it's about the programs. The students don't come here for the services, I don't think. They come here for the programs. But they want to make sure the programs are best in class. And while we're having best in class program, our services need to match. They're having a great customer service experience. And that experience should be the same wherever they go throughout the district. That's what I've been doing in this multi-campus environment, is really talking differently about how we make decisions, how do we communicate, how do we support one another, how do we support our learners. That's, I think, how we do it, even in a multi-college environment like Foothill-De Anza. and still meet our accreditation requirements alongside of that.
Thank you. How about this one? How do you feel about operating within a quarter system when so many colleges and universities are on semester?
So when I was in Washington State, we were quarter system. In fact, as a student at Evergreen, we were a quarter system. I actually love the quarter system. When I went to the University of Puget Sound, they were a semester system. And so when I went to Evergreen and I transferred after being in the Army, then I went to Evergreen, it's like I was so grateful to be in a quarter system. Because if I wanted to learn more different disciplines, more different topics, I could do that in a quarter system and not be captured into a 16-week term, but into a shorter term so you could do more, right? So I preferred that from a learner perspective. But I also want us to think about it in this way. Today's learner, they want more shorter term. So the question is a quarter system even sufficient anymore? Because what we're seeing at the colleges that have semester systems, they've now broken that semester down to 8 weeks. So the colleges that are seeing more success in terms of persistence, retention, and completion are the ones who are breaking things down into 8 weeks. So is that going to challenge us as a quarter system to rethink how we do things? And then also, how do we think about it as 12 months as opposed to 9 months? I mean, I think the world is evolving, right? It's changing. I'm not saying we're going to impose this on anybody, but I want us to start thinking about these realities, right? And oh, by the way, even to my earlier question, I didn't even talk about our micro pathway. All the changes at Pima would not have happened if the faculty, not all the faculty, but if the faculty had not embraced it. Because I can't make it happen. The board can't make it happen. Only the faculty at the end of the day can remake the program. And the rest of us are dependent on the faculty's willingness to remake the program. The professional staff, the administrators, the community, the students, we're all dependent on the faculty at the end of the day to be willing to do that. But my job is to help challenge, share a different perspective, provide the support to make the pivot, and you start with the folks who want to do it. And I think that's partly why you're seeing the transformation that's happening at Pima. It's because the faculty's willingness to adapt and grow into this new reality.
Change of focus. In your opinion, what role do intercollegiate athletic programs play in the overall success and identity of a community college, specifically Foothill-De Anza? How do you think such programs benefit the college, its students, and the surrounding community?
So for much of my life, my formative years, I played football, basketball, baseball, I ran track. Yeah, I'm not a big guy, right? But I played football all the way through 12th grade. And I was recruited to play football at the collegiate level. I believe in athletics because it attracts a kid like myself who probably, even though my parents were saying go to college, I probably might not have went to college. Athletics is a way to bring those folks who probably would otherwise go do something else into the college. But I think the key is you can't leave it at that. Like, that may bring you through our doors. Now we have an opportunity to transform your mind, right? Transform your heart. And I think that's really the bigger part of this. So really put student before athlete. And so what are the programs that are most attractive? Well, obviously, on the female side, we're going to have basketball and soccer and softball and volleyball. On the male side, we're going to have football and baseball and basketball and soccer and a number of other programs, right? So I fully believe in them. Now, and I'll have to confess something to all of you, and that is when I was at Pima, I'm still at Pima, I had to make the difficult decision to cut football. Now, why did I have to do that? Well, for one, Maricopa decided to cut its football program. Once Maricopa cut its football programs, we no longer had a league. So it went from having, I think, about 7 or 8 teams down to 4. So where were we going to travel? We were going to have to travel a lot further now to get games for our athletes. It was going to cost us a lot more to do that. You get the idea, right? And so it was like we had to make the difficult decision to get rid of football, and that pains me, especially for someone who I love football. But I don't make decisions based always about what I believe in personally, but sometimes you got to make decisions because it's what's right for the district. Given the resources we have to work with, as long as it's consistent with our mission, I will always make that commitment to each and every one of you. We will always put the mission first, and as the board has defined the mission, it's student success. But sometimes we have to make some tough decisions in order to make sure we can deliver on our mission. But athletics is key as part of that.
What position did you play in football?
So I was a running back and a cornerback. Back then, when you didn't have all this fancy turf and all that, I could run a 4.5 40. And I was quick.
What does shared governance mean to you, and what particular process or policies would you institute to ensure effective shared governance across the district?
So come back to this notion of community, kindness, caring, and consideration. That all wraps into we have to include the folks who will be impacted by decisions. And so each of our employees, faculty, staff, and administrators should be part of our decision-making process. I didn't say that they get to make the decision, because the state of California has authorized only the board ultimately to make decisions in the best interest of the district. Now it's up to the board to determine how much of that they delegate down to their CEO, and then from the CEO down accordingly. And of course, that has to be consistent with our accreditation requirements and other state laws and so forth. I know you have, was AB 1725, am I saying the right bill for 10+1? And so that lays out a nice framework around who's primary for certain decisions in terms of the decision-making process, and faculty, especially in the curriculum area, program reviews and all that. I think that's critical, right? But then the board has also defined for our district certain areas where they want that to be a joint decision as part of the decision process, right? So I believe that means the administrator and other employees have to be part of some aspects of that. And so I'm a firm believer in all of that. I came from the state of Washington, where shared governance was a big part of the equation. Collective bargaining was a big part of the equation. And I believe having a framework and a structure is very critical. I don't have that in the state of Arizona. So I can only create what we can create that was within the legal boundaries. Sometimes our employees don't always agree with that, but it's what is in place in the state of Arizona. But nonetheless, involving people in decisions, I think that's critical. Seeking input and ideas, like I said, some of these program things I have touched on, we could not have done that without the faculty, without the staff. And so because the board may have an idea, I may have an idea, but we don't know how it's going to play out on the ground. Can you actually do it? You got to go talk to the folks who are in the classrooms, who are in the offices interacting with our students to know how this will play out. So it really takes all of us working together. And so I'm a firm believer in shared governance. And I believe here, I've heard the term from my colleagues, participatory governance. But at the end of the day, it's about us as people getting in the room together and working together to solve problems.
Thank you. How would you ensure that non-academic support services are well-resourced?
This is going to be one of the most difficult challenges that we have. And my understanding in the state of California, you have the FON, and then you have the 50% rule, right? So we're balancing the FON and the 50% rule in terms of the faculty side of the equation, the academic side of the equation in terms of direct instruction. So that only leaves the other part of the pie for all these other parts of what we do. So that's going to impact our ability to support the staff and the administrators and all the other things we need to do to run a highly optimized operation for the institution. But I think we can find that balance. Some of that balance comes into thinking about the structure and the systems and processes we have in place. And are we unnecessarily duplicating things that we don't need to be doing, like 2 different applications as an example of that, right? Why not have one process that spans the entire district as opposed to multiple processes that creates more work? And therefore you need more people, but you can't afford the more people, so then you stretch the people who are here because of that. Let's streamline it. If it doesn't impact the classroom, why not think differently that way? So those are the kinds of things I'd look for in terms of the staff. How can we reimagine your work? How can we streamline our systems and processes to allow a more effective way, more optimized way to go about what we do? And the application is just an example of that.
Thank you. Your resume indicates a great deal that you have done for workforce programs. What are your experiences with non-workforce programs, i.e. the more academic classes and majors, and how have you promoted them in your career?
So for 8 years, I taught a class called Law, Civil Rights, and Social Justice. That's all about the liberal arts. That's not workforce development whatsoever. And so I want you to know that I have that direct experience with that, and that's what I'm committed to. But we also have to step back and say, as I mentioned earlier, what's happening to the academic side non-workforce piece. I think there's more of a blurring of lines happening, first of all, as I noted earlier. But at the same time, what do you think Guided Pathways is about? It's about investment back into the academic side of the college. Online is an investment back into the academic side of the college. The textbooks and OER, Open Educational Resources, that's a lot about the academic side. So all of those things I have been involved in investing in and making sure we create a better learning experience for our students. And all of that is tied directly to what happens on the liberal arts academic side of the equation. It may not always feel that way, but all of that is about enhancing that learner experience, and in doing that, hopefully results in better retention and completion rates for our students, which then helps support that side of the programming area. Why workforce at Pima? Because when I came in and did my assessment and then brought in this outside firm to look at it, where we were deficient was in workforce, in our adult basic education. That's where the district was deficient the most. Given the limited amount of resources I had and where we could make the greatest impact with what we had, that's why it seems this way. It's not to ignore the academic side, but that was after, if the academic side would have been the one that was the most in deficit, more attention would have went there. So I just want you to know that. I go where the data and the evidence leads us to. But we need to do those assessments to understand what that is and where the opportunities are for our community.
Thank you. You mentioned employees in shared governance. What role do you think students have?
So as a student, I always like to tell this story because I think it's so important to involve students, especially in our committee work. I'm a big fan of task force, and when I was at Evergreen, we called it disappearing task force. So when we had a specific area of focus, they would convene a disappearing task force. We wanted to make sure everyone understood the task force didn't come together to continue forever, but it came for a specific purpose, right? So one task force that they formed, one DTF they formed, was around housing. So as we were looking to build some additional housing for the college, and by the way, Evergreen could call themselves a university. They just don't want to call themselves a university. They meet all the requirements of being a university. So they wanted to build housing, and so they formed a committee to do that, and they had a student on the committee. Guess who that student was? It was me. And as they went, I was learning about all these architectural plans and these building plans. All that just kind of went over my head at the time, right? But when it came down to what the experience was going to be in the units themselves, so they came up with an apartment style room setting, and they were going to have 5 rooms, 1 bathroom. You can already see the problem with that, right? Especially if you were a student in those 5 rooms. So I raised my hand and said, that's a great design, but here's what I think we need to think about. 5 people with 1 bathroom? I don't think that's going to cut it, right? So sometimes when we include our learners, our students in the process, there's things we might have overlooked. But because they're there and they're looking at it from a different lens, their voice is essential. And maybe sometimes it's just that one thing that they contribute. But I would say the students probably said that one thing made all the difference for them, right? So I'm a big fan of that. I also think, when you have selection committees, hiring committees, it's good to have a student there to hear their voice because they bring that different perspective. So I'm a big fan of including our students in every facet that we can. And I'll use one last example. Come back to the OER. So here in the state of California, you have it more as a formal structure to have a student trustee. But in Arizona, we don't have that requirement. So we can't just have a student trustee. But what our board has done is created something equivalent to a student trustee. So we have a student that sits up on the diocese with our board members. So one year we had a student who brought forward the concern of textbook cost to the board. And so the board said, okay, what would you recommend we do about this? And so it ultimately led to the formation of a task force, included students, and we started looking at what we can do around textbooks from an open educational resource perspective. As a result of that, we now are doing OER at Pima Community College, and to date, on a go-forward basis, I think we're saving students over $8.5 million a year just by incorporating OER into what we do. And so that's why I think it's so essential to make sure we include our students.
Thank you. Do you have experience in policy at the state legislative level? And if so, what have you been advocating for? And can you describe your work?
Yes. I can give you two examples. One from my time in the state of Washington and one from my time here at Pima Community College. So in the state of Washington, we ran a program at Shoreline that was a high school retrieval program. So if a student dropped out or stopped out of the high school, he or she or they could enroll in our high school retrieval program. Well, the question is, who funds that? Well, the high schools funded that. Well, but there wasn't a law that required it to happen. So our local high school partner, our district partner, decided they were going to end that program. So we would have nobody to provide the resources for us to run this high school retrieval program. So I picked up the phone, called one of our key lawmakers, and said, I have this problem. We have this very successful program. Would you be willing to consider sponsoring a bill? And so she did. So we drafted a bill, or she did. We helped with that process. And then when it came time to go in front of the House and the Senate, we got students together who had gone through the program, and we took them to Olympia. So I was up in Seattle. We took them to Olympia. And I didn't testify. I let the students testify about the impact. There wasn't a dry eye on the House side. There wasn't a dry eye on the Senate side, because that student voice resonated. But that first time we did it, it didn't pass. And so I went and talked to, then the Senate was controlled by the Republican Party. So I went and talked to one of the key leaders of one of the key committees. And how I did it was I invited him out to Shoreline, took him into our automotive center. So we had an OEM-based original equipment manufacturer training program. And so he saw all the latest cars that are in the market. And then he saw that fancy sports car sitting there. So we had him sit in that fancy sports car and all of that. And all of a sudden he said, Lee, all you had to do is change the word from shall to may. And your bill's going to pass. So we went back, we changed the word to may. Now they're running a high school retrieval program again. I look for what problem do we need to solve? Is the problem going to require legislation? What's my proof that that's the problem? And then we go and start to cultivate our partners to get it done. The key is it's not what we did at the time, it's what we did long before that. I'm a firm believer that the Chancellor, especially the Chancellor in this instance, has to develop relationships with the key lawmakers in the state of California. Both within our district here, but also with key leaders in the different committees, because if it's an appropriation committee, you're going to need to know that person, right? Or if it's the education committee, you got to know that person on both sides of in the Senate and the Assembly, right? And because you never know when you may need to advance something. So at PEMA, I always believe in proof of concept. I'm not going to come to you and ask you for something until I can prove it to you. So we're in the process right now. I already got some other bills passed, so I'm going to use this current one. So we have a bill right now playing out where we got a Republican sponsor in Arizona. If you want to get anything done, you got to get the Republican Party to support you. So I got a new senator to support a bill to allow us to count non-credit towards our FTEs. I know here in the state of Arizona, there's parts of the non-credit you can count, is my understanding. But we don't have that in Arizona. So we got her to sponsor it. We worked the Senate side. It passed from the Senate. It went over to the House side. House side is like, oh no, you know, this is, and then, but we worked and figured out and said, okay, we're okay with these amendments. So if I recall correctly, it has passed the House now. Now they have to go into the conference and work out the details. If that all works, we're going to pass this new law that's going to allow the colleges in the state of Arizona to count certain types of non-credit towards what we call is our expenditure limit law. Because I have proof of concept. I can show them these short-term non-credit courses that are aligned to good jobs in Pima County, and the other colleges can show the same thing, and then we made the move. That's how I would approach and work through things at the state level, but also at the federal level as well.
So I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions before we give you a chance to wrap up. Tell us what you think of remote work.
That's another delicate issue, right? So, but don't look at it from our perspective for a moment. Who are our primary investors into this institution? Who are the primary investors? It's the taxpayer. So what does the taxpayer expect from us? We are just stewards of those dollars. Well, Foothill-De Anza just went out on a bond, and it was almost $1 billion, right? Now, why would this community support a bond to support the physical infrastructure of this district if there's nobody coming to work at the physical locations? Think about that. So if we're going to think about the next bond and we want support, but there's nobody here working and no students learning, are they going to support that bond? I mean, I think we have to not lose sight of the big picture is my point in all this, right? So I think we bring remote work into that context and figure out the proper balance. I recognize that the technology now is such that not everybody needs to be at a physical place. But we're not a Apple or a Google or an Intel. We are a publicly funded institution where we are the stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So they depend on us to use that investment wisely. So we have this added layer that we have to balance. So I think having conversations with all the unions here, I believe there's 5 unions here, and talking about how do we allow for some flexibility, but also being cognizant of this larger reality is where we have to work through that. And where is that equilibrium, okay? And then not every position is suited to remote work. So if you're a facilities person, guess where you need to be? You need to be on the ground, right? If you're a police officer, where do you need to be? So there's not going to be fair. Because by the way, I've been dealing with this at Pima Community College. There's no fairness in remote work. It's defined by your position. And that's hard sometimes because we tend to think, well, that's not fair. But so we've got to think about it from the lens of the taxpayer, and then we need to think about it amongst ourselves, our colleagues. Not all of our colleagues can work remotely. And then we need to think about, most importantly, our students. There are a number of students who need to come in and have face-to-face. They need it. And we need to be here for them. So we got to weigh all that out to come to some critical decision. And maybe we come to one decision and we play that out for a year, we step back, we reassess it, see how that went, and then make adjustments. That's what continuous improvement's about, right? And our creditors are pushing us on this continuous improvement front. But that's how I would approach this whole conversation.
So I'm faced with a difficult dilemma here. We have a whole bunch of questions left, which we're not going to get to.
Right.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I've been asked to give you the time to circle back to anything that you would like to expand on or anything you'd like to add. But I've got this one card here that says, what brings you joy and what keeps you up at night? So I don't know which to let you do here.
I can use that as a way to
Circle back? Okay.
circle back, right? In our community here in the Silicon Valley, according to Brookings, there are almost 300,000 individuals who are considered low-wage workers. About 20% of them already have a 4-year degree. About 8%, I think, have an associate's degree. But then you have about 25, 26% who have some college, no credential. That's what keeps me up at night. We have these families, individuals and families in our community who turn to us. They trust us to provide them with the competencies, the knowledge, skills, and abilities so they don't have to be low-income workers. Are we meeting that challenge? When I see 300,000, what do you think that answer is being communicated back to us, right? We can do better. That's what keeps me up late at night. That's one facet of it. Another thing that keeps me up is the decisions that go on in Sacramento. Because this funding formula needs to be rethought. Because there's a number of colleges who are pushing up against the cliff. We're one of them, right? And is there a way to rethink it to where that's not the issue? Because it's a different world today. Programs, an automotive program, teaching electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, it's going to cost a lot more today than ever. So we have to rethink how we support the funding of these high-cost programs. If the state wants these programs, which we can't run a whole lot of students through, we've got to think differently. And the formula doesn't account for that. They might argue with me, well, Lee, is it accounted for in your base funding of 70%? I would argue, no, that base funding is based on the old FTE model that did not account for the cost of these high-cost programs, which are the very programs that this community and the community across the state of California need. There are 1.5 million jobs that go unfilled in the middle skill areas. The plumbers, the electricians, you get the idea, right? That's more than the million that Governor Newsom has talked about at the baccalaureate level. So if we're serious about addressing these skills gaps, we've got to rethink the funding formula itself. And that's what I would be advocating for if I'm your chancellor. We've got to think differently. But I think all of you, together, we can think differently. And we can power Foothill-De Anza to just that next level of excellence again. So thank you.
Thank you.